Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Tom, good to see you.
Very happy to be back, Matt. Thank you.
It's been too long. I think the last time we spoke was at PorcFest a couple years ago, and that episode is famous because one of the naked guys went walking by behind us during the middle of a otherwise very important conversation.
Did I just not notice that?
Well, we were looking the other way, and we did not know it was happening, but luckily he's far enough away that we didn't need to pixelate the... We try to be a family program here.
Well, and Matt, you spend your time assuring people, oh, don't worry about it. Go to PorcFest. It's fine. Bring the family. Don't worry about it.
They're usually over in the far corner, but he had escaped his regulated area, us being libertarians and all. But anyway. I digress wildly. Thank you for doing this, and you have a new book project out that is very near and dear to me, Diary of a Psychosis, How Public Health Disgraced, and I can't even see the rest of the title.
It's How Public Health Disgraced Itself During COVID Mania.
Yes, and you are someone that I've followed in this conversation very early on. I honestly don't think there were that many of us. You probably know exactly who spoke out early. I looked this up. The first piece I wrote on this, I published on March 18th, 2020. And the reason I bring that up is it very much reminds me of the first post in your book. But explain the project, because the structure of this I think is fantastic, because I can watch your thinking evolve as you apply your free market libertarian principles to a wildly uncertain situation, and as facts reveal themselves, you get more pugnacious about it. But early on, we're all trying to figure out what happens.
Yeah. And I know that even early on, there were some people who, were super sure of themselves and got it exactly right from the very first second. And the very first second, I was unsure of what was happening. I admit that, but I don't think there's any moral flaw in that. I wanted to wait and see what was going on, which I think if we had all taken that attitude, we would have been much saner in our response. Let's wait and see, because it almost seemed to me like, and I've overused this example, Matt, but I live in Central Florida, and every year there's something called the Central Florida Metal Fest. And it was happening like in the middle of March 2020. And so building up to it, there's all this excitement. Oh, the Central Florida Metal Fest is coming up. And then there was this news about this virus coming out of China. And as the months and weeks went on, you heard some people talking about whether this might affect the Metal Fest. And they were all saying, we're metal people, we're not afraid of any virus, come at us. But then when we got the actual information, and it turned out it was, whatever you might say about it, far less deadly than they thought it was when they were boasting they were going to be there. They were absolutely insisting that, of course, all responsible people wouldn't want to go. But like a month earlier, like I couldn't understand. It was like it was in some cases, it was almost like people looked forward or wanted bad news. Like I would find some encouraging numbers and nobody wanted to hear them. It was a really strange thing. But yeah, so there was a little bit of just waiting and seeing early on. But because I write a daily or at least weekday email newsletter, I don't have the luxury of just sitting back and saying, well, I'll wait till we get a little bit more information before I jump in. People expected me to jump in. That's why they subscribed to my email newsletter. So I was just honest with them. Well, this is where I am right now, and this is how I'm thinking about it, and I'd love to know what perspectives you all have. And the real thing was, as they were engaged in these, in fact, I remember myself thinking, it never occurred to me they would lock the society down. I just thought, wow, maybe we're going to be in for a mass death event. This is horrible. I don't know. It never occurred to me that they would take this particular tack on it. So then when they did, I wanted to know, whether it was doing any good or not, because everyone was so sure that it would. And I understand the logic. It seems like it should have helped. And so what I was trying to do was to wait and see when some data came out. Do we have anything indicating whether our severe modifications of our behavior have actually done anything? And that becomes, after the initial confusion, that kind of becomes the theme of the book, which is, let's actually look at the hard numbers. Let's look at some charts. Let's see what they said would happen. Let's measure it against what actually did happen. Let's see if the things we were ordered to do did any good, or if all they did was just destroy society for no reason. That was what I was trying to find out, and I was seeking out dissident voices. I wanted to know, is there anybody who's looking at this situation differently from Anthony Fauci? And if so, where are they getting their data? And how are they drawing their conclusions? And early on, as you may remember, Matt, it was not easy to find such people because, as we've said, nobody quite knew what was going on. But as the months went on, these people began to assert themselves.
Yeah, and one of the guy that a friend of both of ours, J Bachara, Dr. J Bachara of Stanford, writes the introduction, and he and Scott Atlas, as far as I can tell, were two of the very first qualified scientists that questioned it from a scientific and public health perspective, because they knew, we didn't know at the time, but they knew at the time that something like a lockdown, one, hadn't been tried, and two, had been roundly denounced as potentially catastrophic because of the economic fallout that would happen if you did that. You, as an economist, one of your very first posts, I think you're talking to a doctor friend, and he's a little bit anxious about where you are, maybe more than a little bit anxious. But you take on the economic consequences of doing real lockdowns for any amount of time would be catastrophic, particularly for people at the economic margin.
Oh, yeah. In fact, yeah, it's a woman, actually. I went to school with her, and she went to a very elite medical school. She's got an excellent reputation in her field, and she's a good woman. Like, she really did want to try to minimize collateral damage. She wasn't obtusely pretending that there was no collateral damage, but she was looking at the situation and saying, well, we have to do something. And what she was unhappy with me about was that she said that my Facebook followers were not very polite because they were all speaking out against what was being done. And I was trying to explain to her, I think I understand their frustration. And I pointed out that all the wealth that exists in the world is about the equivalent of, I think it's 3 years worth of current production. So that's an interesting statistic. So that means if you seriously cut into one of the years of current production, that's a very, very significant thing you're doing to the economy and to the world. But early on, the way it got framed, as you recall, Matt, was that they were trying to contrast people who were selfless and thinking about human life against greedy bastards like me who cared only about, quote, the economy and making sure that the stock market went up or something like that. Like, they weren't even really listening, because my point was, you're looking at the economy in a very juvenile way. The economy is not just some stock prices. I mean, we are the economy. The economy is this impressive globe-spanning lattice work of capital goods and production processes that interlock with each other to yield us the abundance of goods we enjoy. And that if you arbitrarily start taking a crowbar to that, saying, well, we're going to have to shut this down or shut that down, the consequences could be pretty severe for human life. And indeed, it's interesting to note, in this kind of context, the state of the developing world, because there, in the U.S., the U.S. is a rich country, and we could suffer some let's say, debilitating losses and still nevertheless have a livable standard of living. But there are countries that in which the vast majority of the people are living hand to mouth. I mean, they're living to the point where every day they earn enough money to feed themselves for that day. And so the consequences of this type of policy are obvious. And I had a guy who he has tragically died super young. Should not have happened. But Gret Glyer, who was the creator of the DonorSee app, which is a philanthropy app, And he spent 3 years living in Malawi, the poorest country in the world. And his heart was full of love and affection for the people of Malawi. And he told me that one of the stories that we weren't likely to read in the Western press was that when the idea of a lockdown was explained to the people of Malawi, well, they're capable of doing the math. They realize that if they go 5-6 weeks or who knows, an indefinite period of time with no income, they die. I mean, that's the end of it. There's no way this can possibly work. And so they revolted and said, there's absolutely no way we're doing this. And so there was no lockdown in Malawi. Now, almost nobody knows that kind of story. And so one of the benefits of being a guy who wrote about this every single weekday for 3 years is that details like that either we never heard about or are long forgotten, but yet that when taken together really are the story. I remember these things. Like I remember the small detail, because I live in Florida, of Alachua County, where Jacksonville is. Alachua County said that you can have in your retail establishment one person per 1,000 square feet. And so they were asked, the city council or whatever the group is there, how'd you come up with that figure? And they said, well, that's a nice round number, so we thought it would be easy math for everybody to do. So there's no science behind this. This was to make math convenient for people. I mean, that kind of detail we need, is easily overlooked and forgotten, but I didn't overlook or forget it. I mean, things like that, you put them together, that is the story that I want my kids to know someday about what happened to us. And if I may say, in a further parentheses here, I have 5 daughters, and they pretty well understood what was happening, and that Florida, where we live, gave them far more opportunities to live normal children's lives than just about anywhere else on earth. They kind of got that. But they're kids, and I want them to have an innocent childhood. So I don't, there's a lot of misery and rottenness and evil in the world, and I don't grind their noses in the dirt all the time telling them about it. I don't. If they ask me, I'll give them an answer. But generally, I don't do that because I just want them to have a good childhood. So I wasn't constantly telling them, you can't believe what they're doing in Australia, or you can't believe what they're doing in California. I don't want them worrying about that. So even they didn't fully understand the scope of what's going on. So I wanted to produce a record of it that would be useful for all of us who lived through it, as well as those who did not live through it, because by going through it, not quite day by day, but in that kind of format, I hope to reproduce something of the texture of life at that time. And in fact, sometimes I repeat an argument several times or a fact several times throughout the book. And I kept that in because I wanted to also capture that, how exasperated we all felt, repeating the same very persuasive arguments and feeling like we were speaking into a void.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool. Yeah. One of the things, and I think that's important, and I know we say this all the time, and I'm sure you hear all the time that we need to move on from COVID, but I see this infrastructure and this arrogance and the lesson of the lockdowners is that we just didn't lock down hard enough. So they want to do it again. They're almost salivating at the opportunity of getting the next pandemic right. So people do need to understand. And speaking of psychosis, like whenever you engage people on social media, if they were pro lockdown, they deny everything that you document in your book. They say, oh, that didn't happen. They didn't do that. They didn't tell people that they would lose their jobs if they didn't get vaccinated. They didn't tell people they couldn't cross state lines. They didn't tell people that they couldn't go to the beach. But of course, they did all that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they did over and over again, and it's it was a bizarre situation, really. That's why I call it a psychosis, because I've got facts here that need to be reckoned with. And they're not facts that I took from some obscure place or that they could be cast into doubt. There are two, in fact, the book is filled with just absolutely relentless. I mean, relentless. It's like a sledgehammer every page to the official narrative. But if you needed just two facts, I think these two facts alone make it extremely hard for people who supported all these restrictions to defend themselves. Now, let me start by saying, first of all, since I did live in Florida throughout the entire thing, I personally had an interaction on Twitter that I thought was very revealing. Sometime in 2021, I had somebody say, I've looked at, everybody's saying that Florida's doing great, even though it's open, and I've looked at its numbers, and Florida seems pretty average. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy actually thinks that's a win for him. And so I explained, now wait a minute. If in March 2020, I asked you if there's an American state that basically doesn't do any of this stuff, would you describe its likely results as, quote, very average? Or would you describe them as absolutely catastrophic? So the very fact that you're even calling them average means that you were wrong to begin with. There's no way you were going to tell me in March 2020 that in late 2021, Florida would be, quote, very average. But beyond that, it's not very average. Florida, actually, and now I lead into the one of the two facts, when we look at Florida versus California, of course you have to adjust for age, because Florida is a notoriously old population. I mean, it's like a cliche. Everybody moves to Florida to retire. And there's 1,000-fold age gradient difference in mortality in this. So you adjust for that, and you find, well, what do you find? Well, you found that throughout this thing, Florida and California was like Lockdownistan, were about the same in terms of their results. I mean, very, very trivial difference. But when the whole thing was all said and done, which one actually did better in terms of all-cause mortalities? That eliminates the problem of coding a COVID death, and that also eliminates the problem of excluding lockdown-related deaths. You just put them all in there. You look at what were expected trends in deaths and what were the actual ones. Which of the two states did better? Florida did better. Now, that should be, if the logic of the public health establishment was correct, that should be metaphysically impossible. But that was the result. And I spent some time in California, even during the height of it. I was with one of my daughters once, and I thought, well, geez, what can we do under the circumstances? So one thing you could do, Matt, you could go to a drive-in movie. Because, you're in your car, right? Even the crazies in California have to admit you're in your car. So we actually went, because I thought, in this day and age, nobody goes to a drive-in movie. This would be fun to do with my daughter. So we went to a drive-in movie. But I thought it was interesting that by order of the Department of Public Health, no double features allowed. Now, look, 2 times 0 is still 0. It's just crazy. It was things like that. Or when they reopened Disney at 15% capacity, the last Disney property anywhere on Earth to reopen, they instituted a rule, heaven knows how you would enforce it, saying no screaming during the rides. I mean, that was how psychotic the thing was.
Come on, Tom. The science. The science.
Well, I don't know how you stop yourself, but anyway, then the other fact is the case of Sweden. Now, we've all heard a lot about Sweden, and they didn't have the standard lockdown, and the authorities, the establishment was screaming at Sweden, if you don't lock down. And it wasn't even like, well, they haven't followed our advice, but let's pray for them that they somehow come out of this okay. That was, Matt, you remember that was never the tone that was ever taken toward a recalcitrant place. It was always the underlying tone of, they're going to get what's coming to them for not listening to us.
They were giddy. They were giddy about the carnage that was about to befall Sweden.
It was like they wanted to see. It was like when Georgia reopened, and I think it was the Washington Post called it a state that was aiming to become the country's #1 death destination. I mean, they were just dying for it to happen, so to speak. And it didn't really. I mean, by June, the Imperial College model said there would be 96,000 deaths in Sweden. There were 4,000, so as usual, off by a factor of 24. But again, when all is said and done, when we look back on the experience and we look at the countries of Europe, which one did best in all-cause mortality? Doggone it, it's Sweden. Now, again, if we had asked in March 2020, if there's a country that just flat out defies you people, Do you think that it will be the one that has the best record of all-cause mortality? You would have been laughed out of the room. But that is the reality. So now what kind of answer do they have? Well, they just ignore it. It's just insane. It really.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with BlazeTV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it. So I want to stop in Sweden for a second because I'm obsessed about this question, and you posit all sorts of theories about why this insane experiment happened. Is this a classic bureaucrats with fatal conceit thinking that they can science their way out of it, and we're all lab rats and they're willing to treat us that way? You know, Francis Collins just admitted that when he was doing policy, he did not consider the economic consequences because he's focused on the science. And was it just that arrogance, that naivete? And maybe that's the story, because I forget the guy's name in Sweden, but the Fauci of Sweden was one stubborn SOB that said, this is bad science, this will be counterproductive to lockdown, and he just literally refused to comply. But he was very much an outlier in the public health community. But for everybody else, like, what's the motive here? Is it power and money, which is sort of our go-to explanation for government overreach? I honestly don't fully understand why this happened, because I don't think power and money is enough of an explanation.
Yeah, and I think to go to these kinds of lengths, it's so over the top in terms of what a crime that would have been if any of this was either done deliberately or purely for material gain. My brain certainly can't compute that level of evil. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I think there are people who seem to me to be a little bit too confident in always knowing the answer to what the real motives of the people who run the world are. That anytime you try to have an argument, they say, well, they've always got some explanation that involves, you're trying to argue in good faith, but these people are up to no good. There are people who are up to no good. Did they stage an event like this as a pretext for trying out a massive experiment in social engineering? You'd have to give me more evidence of that than I've seen. So what I try to do in this book is something fairly modest, which is, I think a lot of times, especially a lot of our people, they want to start the story on chapter 37. Let's talk about the sinister forces behind world events. But the thing is, if you're going to persuade people of something, you're going to have to start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 is it didn't work. Okay, because there are hundreds of millions of people, if not billions, who to this day think the public health people just did the best they could in a difficult situation, and they were up against really stubborn naysayers who refused to listen to science. There are a lot of people who believe that. And we're not going to get anywhere if we don't make headway against that type of argument. And so the first step, in my opinion, is it didn't work. We did an enormous amount of damage to a great many people. I mean, it's unthinkable, the collateral damage that was caused by this. And to add insult to injury, it doesn't seem to have accomplished anything. To me, that's where you start.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that people can learn from your book are some of these basic tools that you get from, I would say, Austrian economics, but even back to Bastiat is where I started my journey, just trying to figure out what the consequences of a lockdown would be in real life. And you already described that intricate web of people with personal skills that ensure, Bastiat talked about, how is Paris fed and why does bread magically show up in the morning when you wake up? And I don't think that lockdowners at all appreciated the basic economics that allows for that beautiful process to happen. Yeah. So that was the first tool that we had, right? Is like we understand that economics is a distributed network of personal talents, and deciding that some people are essential and some people are not essential is going to break the whole thing.
Unfortunately, I think this is one of the results of the fact that in our schools, kids, what do kids learn? They learn how a bill becomes a law. Like that's the most important thing. But they don't learn how prices work. But that is at least as important, because I could imagine a society where there are no bills becoming laws, but I can't really imagine a society without exchange. And how that coordinates all these disparate people and talents and forces and resources is truly a wondrous thing. I mean, it's the kind of thing that younger people could find quite appealing, because they're not so cynical that the sense of wonder has been sucked out of them. They can actually look at that and say, isn't it amazing? I would have thought something as simple as the proverbial pencil or the Rothbardian ham sandwich was a boring, mundane thing. But when I look at exactly what is involved here and how it all happens with no central direction, there's no pencil czar, there's no ham sandwich czar. This is an amazing thing. No one has that. Instead, they just kind of take for granted, because the system is so good, they think it's automatic. And so that's a big problem. So one of the things I did with this, so as you said, the book is called Diary of a Psychosis, but and it's got a lot of charts and graphs in it, and it's not boring because it has charts and graphs. The charts and graphs are sledgehammer charts and graphs, so you're going to enjoy looking at them. But I decided that the whole story can't just be told that way. There are, of course, also personal stories of people with lost livelihoods, with the loss of family members because either they missed a surgery or suicide, or their relative had to die alone in the hospital, or whatever it is, things they'd worked for destroyed, or families split apart. There are still families where some relatives will not talk to other ones. I'm still getting emails from readers about that. So I came up with a companion volume that I give away for free when people buy Diary of a Psychosis, and it's called Collateral Damage. And what I did was because I was getting these emails from people who subscribe to my newsletter all the time about just tragedies you can't believe, and they were writing to me saying, look, I know there's nothing you can do to help me, but I feel like there's nobody else who even gives a damn. Because we weren't supposed to tell those stories. If you're complaining about the restrictions, you're probably an evil person who wants to kill your grandmother. I mean, you remember how that was. So these people have not been able to tell these stories. And so I had a whole collection of them. So I realized, wait a minute, no one's ever collected stories like this into a single volume. So I wrote to these people and said, would you like to be included? I mean, I can do it anonymously if you prefer, or with your name, but in a supplementary volume that I'm including with my new book, and I'm going to call it Collateral Damage. Not one of them said no, Matt. They just wanted to have these stories heard, because they just weren't heard at the time. So I have a website for the book where you can click on buy it from Amazon or whatever. But the website is diaryofcovid.com. And at diaryofcovid.com, once you've bought the book from whatever bookseller you use, you can go to diaryofcovid.com and get the Collateral Damage book. And as I say, I don't think there's been a collection like this. And that is that's incredible after what was done to people. There's not one book collecting their stories. So I thought, well, that's one thing I can do.
So I bought the book, but I have not downloaded the personal stories. And this in many ways is more interesting to me, because I think, and you've already made this case, that if we're going to persuade people, I think we need to make it personal. We need to tell these stories of real people who paid the real consequences of this abstract vision that the lockdowners had. And most of the work we've done has told sometimes really devastating stories about people whose businesses and families and even one guy's his son died because he couldn't get to the hospital for the tests that he ultimately would have needed to survive. These are the kinds of things that I think connect with people who are never going to understand the logic of a complex price system. Can you tell a story? Give us a story that you think is pretty compelling.
Well, this one, and let me say at the beginning that you might think this all sounds really depressing. I don't think I want to read this. And believe me, I sympathize with that. But at the same time, we read the histories of totalitarian regimes, which are just stories of sorrow and horror through and through, because we find value in that, because we want to honor the victims, because we want to understand the phenomenon better. And so that's why we ought to do it. It's not because it gives us pleasure. It's because, in a way, this helps them to feel human again, that other people have some kind of fellow feeling with them. Well, the one that really jumps out at me is the story of it's a man whose 16-year-old daughter committed suicide because of the lockdowns, because absolutely everything she cherished. I mean, we all had things taken away, but her particular story, it was one thing after another that she'd worked for and looked forward to. Everything that she cherished, including friendships, had all been stripped away. And the father tells the story in an extremely sarcastic manner, like pros and cons of the lockdown regime. And he lists them. And the cons are all, let's see, my daughter committed suicide. It broke down all these social networks. But the pros are, she didn't get COVID, which she had a 99.999% chance of not dying from anyway. She didn't get that. And the way he does it, he's filled with sorrow, but also rage. And I read that, and I remember the night that he sent me that email, and I was a little tired as I was reading it, and I was just jolted awake as I read him recalling bit by bit. You could see where it was going, how everything she cherished was being taken away, and there was no prospect of it coming back. I mean, I remember people saying, we'll probably not have live music anymore. We're not going to have live theater anymore. Really? And so ultimately she couldn't take it anymore, and she's gone. And the way he tells that story, I actually wrote back to him and said, are you sure this isn't too personal? Are you sure you want to share this? And he absolutely was immovable that he wanted it shared.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we create at Free the People. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty, independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show. That's devastating. There's one of the documentaries we made is called All We Have, and it's about a guy who's now a friend of mine, Fred, and his family restaurant, the Schnitzel House in Brooklyn.
Oh, yes.
As you know, New York and Cuomo were as radical as it got when it came to locking down, and it's his son who was having grand mal seizures in the middle of all this, and his tests kept getting postponed, and then he died. And so as devastating as that story is, in some ways, Fred's story is a hero's journey about how he's trying to recover from this incalculable loss. And he posts about it every day on Facebook to this day, but he's wanting his restaurant to survive for his son and his parents, and that in a weird way is giving him the purpose that he would otherwise just give up. But again, this particular film, which I would consider a radical takedown of lockdowners and Cuomo in particular, it doesn't say all that stuff, but it doesn't have to, because you're just watching what the government is doing to this family. It won Best COVID Film at the New York Shorts Festival. And I have a wild theory that the judges at the New York Shorts Festival are not Austrian economists who understand the unintended consequences of government actions. They were probably lockdowners, so they were able to do that. You also talk about Catherine.
Oh, Catherine Hewig? Can I tell her story?
Yes.
So this is another example of somebody I got to meet over the course of this thing who I would never have met otherwise, but I'm very glad to know. Like, for example, you and I now know J Bachara. I can't speak for you, Matt, but I had never heard of him before all this. But now I consider him a real gem of a human being. I mean, honestly, when I observe him, even though he has every right to lose his temper and be unhinged and all that, he has such a he's so temperate in his remarks, and he keeps control of himself in a way I could not. He's a great example to us. So anyway, so Catherine Hewig is an example of somebody I would never have met otherwise, but who's a very impressive person. So she was following all this stuff in Ohio, and somehow she got to the Ohio State House, and she brought with her a graph, and it was a graph of like COVID health outcomes over time. But so the x-axis depicted time. So January 2020, let's say August 2020, September 2020, all the way up through, let's say, sometime in 2021. But the x-axis was unmarked. So she wasn't showing exactly what period of time this was. You just know that it was sometime between March 2020 and today. And the number of deaths and whatever is jumping up and down, or there'll be a big mountain and then it will come down. And so she was asking the legislators, now, you all told us that these measures that you implemented were urgently necessary for the sake of public health. Urgently necessary. So urgent that they justified measures that were obviously going to decimate people's savings, divide families against each other, ruin businesses, disrupt the healthcare industry, and on and on. So these things better have had really, really measurable, obvious results. So let's look at the chart. I want you to show me where mask mandates went into effect, because that should have had a huge effect. You're asking us to have an intervention that covers the individuating characteristic of the human being, the face, and you told us how urgent this was. I bet that must correspond somewhere on this chart to the numbers falling dramatically. Okay, so go ahead, pick out, where do you think it is? Or Thanksgiving. You all told us if we meet for Thanksgiving, it's going to be death everywhere. That 2 weeks after, wait 2 weeks. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, there should be a huge spike. So go ahead, look at the chart, and you pick out where you think Thanksgiving is. And of course, the answer is none of them know, because it's all random. It's all random. And I, in fact, was so inspired by her takedown of them that I actually, now it hasn't been updated in a while, but I actually created a little website, covidchartsquiz.com, where I just gave this as a quiz. I said, all right, I got 2 charts of 2 neighboring states. So demographically, these people are identical. Or 2 neighboring counties. They're really identical now. In fact, here are 4 counties in Tennessee. One of them reduced restaurant capacity to 25%, which of course restaurants can barely survive on 100%. Tell me which one of these, here are the charts of their results. Which one do you think did that? And of course, you absolutely cannot tell. And I just keep on doing this and doing it over and over and over. But then likewise, I'll show things like the Midwestern states around Thanksgiving. Where's Thanksgiving in here? Just show me. Here's a whole bunch of states together. Where do you think Thanksgiving is? Or which one of these Midwestern states opened up first? It must be the one where the numbers are going through the roof. Well, of course, none of the numbers are going through the roof, so that's wrong. So I did that because I was a little bit academically competitive when I was in school. I didn't like failing tests, but you fail this test every single time. And I did that to make a point that it doesn't. And the thing is, though, Matt, sometimes it seems like the measures weren't even actually intended to have an effect. And here's what I mean by that. The vaccine mandates that they had, for example, California. Los Angeles County had a vaccine mandate, so you couldn't go into a restaurant or all these public places unless you had a vaccine card. But neighboring Orange County did not do that. So you look at the results, they're identical. They are identical. You cannot tell the difference between them. Well, I have found, it's true, I haven't found an American official who openly admitted this. But in the book, I found 2 Canadian officials who openly said, look, we're not saying that we're going to protect people's health by doing this and keeping people out of restaurants. What we're trying to do here is modify people's behavior, is let them know that if you're going to be stubborn about this and not get the shot, then I'm sorry, you can't go to concerts, you can't see your kid play sports, you can't go to a restaurant. We're doing it for that reason. We're doing it for behavior modification. We're not doing it for health. And I rather think that is the reasoning behind a lot of the people who advocated things like that.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at earlier. I don't think grand conspiracy theories are helpful, but looking at, for instance, the demonization of J Bachara, the other signers of the Great Barrington Declaration, the way his own university went after him and his wife, and literally the machine. We can define what the machine is, but they tried to destroy dissent because they were wanting to condition people. And I remember early on talking to Matt Ridley, who wrote with Elena Chen. You've talked to him as well. And he's very cautious about saying, we don't know that there's a lab leak, but there's reasons to believe that maybe this virus was manipulated in a lab. And what I said at the time, which I'm still obsessed with, the cover-up, the demonization of dissenting voices, the censorship by defense interests within the U.S. government, the cover-up itself tells me that something really bad happened and they don't want you to know about it. And, my working theory is that they were probably doing this as some poorly conceived of, wildly dangerous mad science experiment that they believed would actually protect society from bioterrorism. I think those things are probably true, but in the process, they unleashed this hellish virus, and then to cover it up, they created all of this lockdowns to kind of distract us from what they had done. That's my working theory. I don't know that that's true, but where there's smoke, there's fire, and I can't say that sticking with lockdowns over 3 years even made any political sense. Like, even if you're a cynical political operator, after a while, you're losing your own people on this stuff.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about that. Poor David Leonhart from or I don't know how he pronounces his name, from the New York Times. It was his job in late 2021 gradually to let his blue state readers know that really the things we did don't seem to have accomplished anything. I mean, it was October 2021 that he started writing, I've looked at the numbers and it just looks like none of this mattered. But it took them a long time finally to say that. Can I say one other thing about, you were asking me about examples of people who suffered, and I can't believe I left out. I mean, I only gave one, but there's another one I just want you to know about, because this is somebody, if you don't know him, I'd like to introduce him to you. Okay. And that is Clifton Duncan. Does that name ring a bell?
Yes. He's been on the show, but his story is worth documenting in a more substantial way.
Yes, so he's one of the stories in Collateral Damage. But I also want to tell you what he's up to now, because it's really exciting. So Clifton Duncan was a Broadway actor with a lot of television experience. I'm a Broadway fan. Turns out I've actually seen Clifton Duncan on stage twice, 6 years ago. But I had no idea our paths would cross one day. And I loved him. He's fantastic. And if you hear him sing, I saw him in a standard play. I didn't see him in a musical. His voice is out of this world. And he went to a top program, extremely selective. He was getting incredible reviews. His career was definitely on the ascent. And then this all happened. He declined the shot. He said, I neither want nor need this shot, and I'm not going to be bullied into taking it. And just like that, his management abandoned him. He was just left hanging out to dry. And now he's gone in reverse. Most actors wait tables while they wait for their big break. Clifton Duncan is now back to waiting tables, because he just won't do it. And he doesn't even want to be part of anything with these people anymore. But this was what he loved. This was his life. This was what he trained for. This is what he wanted to live for. And he described himself in the middle of last year as being just a shell of a man after what was done to him. But there is some good news since the publication of these books, and that is this, and I expect him to start announcing it soon. But he is interested in working on a one-man show about the life and ideas of Thomas Sowell. And I feel like our people will amplify that every way they can and help him along in that. Because I told him you should start a, if not GoFundMe, then a Give, Send, Go or whatever, to support you while you do the research for this thing, and you give out perks like anybody. I think everybody would want to support you on this because we've seen what you went through unjustly, and also we see the merits of a project like that.
I will do everything I can to promote that and help get that off the ground. And I, incidentally, I started following him on Twitter, and this is old Twitter when they were censoring a lot of us, but there was this Team Reality thing that unfortunately I got involved with perhaps too late, because I could have used a little moral support. I was feeling pretty lonely speaking up against this stuff as well. But and I'm sure you've seen this, or maybe you were there, but he gave this powerful speech at a Mises Institute event.
It was so great.
Yeah, amazing. And this should be maybe one of the white pills that we wrap up this conversation with. I have met so many new friends who didn't know about Austrian economics, didn't know about libertarian philosophy, and they were alone thinking that something was fundamentally wrong in 2020, and they started researching. And I have a friend who's an Israeli basketball player, professional basketball player, and he found Rothbard, and eventually Terry, my wife, and I invited him to a Mont Pelerin meeting because he was trying to figure out why he was so viscerally opposed to lockdowns. And he went down the rabbit hole, started doing research, and is now a very well-schooled Austrian economist who also happens to be a successful basketball player. And I meet so many people like that this I wish there was a different type of opportunity, but people seeing how irrational and stupid and unhumane and devastating these policies were, they're searching for answers. And I think we have a portfolio of ideas and values that I think can be quite attractive and fill in a lot of blanks.
I think so too, and I think now more people than ever are willing to consider what the dissident voices have to say, and that's all to the good. And it's such an interesting thing, the difference between how the elites think and how the rest of us think. Like there was some documentary that came out about Anthony Fauci, and the reviews from the official corners of official opinion were all uniformly positive, and then from the general public they were negative. And so it's fascinating that we live in that kind of a society. Frankly, I would like to see a documentary about the life of J Bachara. I bet that'd be very interesting.
Yeah. So talk about diaryofcovid.com and all of the things, the tools that you can give people when they buy your book.
So diaryofcovid.com is the website. As I say, you don't have to order it through there. It just links to different booksellers there. But it's got all the endorsements. I mean, I'm really happy. I got an endorsement from, I got the forward from J Bachara. I got an endorsement from the Surgeon General of Florida, Joseph Ladapo, who's a great guy. Matt Ridley gave it a nice endorsement. So I'm really happy with this. That's all there. It also has the best 2-minute book video you've ever seen, because in that video, I specifically said, we have to have these particular clips. I've got Andy Slavitt and Anthony Fauci, the 2 times they were ever asked a really hostile question, and how they just whiffed. They just, I don't know, like, why isn't California doing better than it is? You think, but they must have some answer, and they really don't. So there's some good fun meat on that site. But when you pick up Diary of a Psychosis, enter your info, we'll send you the free volume, which is Collateral Damage, the stories of what people endured. So the site is, as you said, diaryofcovid.com.
And your regular show, where do people find that?
TomWoods.com. The Tom Woods Show has released, going on 2,450 episodes. I don't know what I'm trying to prove here, Matt, but I'm still doing it.
You can't stop, right?
Can't. I know. What would I do? Play golf?
I think the last episode I listened to this morning was on scientism, which is a subject near and dear to my heart, sort of the religiosity of the science. And I think there's all sorts of content on there for people that are interested in this subject. We got to win this fight. And I think your contribution is now well documented in this book, and I hope everybody buys it. I love this. It's very different than other books you're going to read on COVID.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate the things you do as well, and I'm very happy to have a chance to talk to you again.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.